Among the issues we explore on Your Education Matters are those regarding government education policy. Fundamental to voters' understanding policy decisions is sound information about our public schools, their financing and quality. There are many sources of such data, including the Ministry of Education, school boards, media, think tanks, and the education stakeholder groups. Perhaps the most visible in the last category is the Research Department of the BC Teachers Federation. Today our guests are two senior research analysts from that department who specialize in teaching and school finance. Charlie Naylor studied and taught in the UK and Australia prior to earning his Ph.D. at UBC. Margaret White, who holds a Master's in Industrial Relations from the University of Toronto, is a career researcher with experience in health and economic issues as well as education. Together they can help us understand key policy matters in BC education, such as class size and composition, school funding, and accountability. We are pleased to welcome these veteran researchers to share their analyses with us on Your Education Matters. Before we get into the specifics of talking about some of your recent research, I wanted to ask you to explain to our audience what the mission is of the BCTF Research Department. Charlie?
Well, I guess it's to do research. Obviously, some of this is directed by the Federation. It's got particular needs. So, for instance, we recently conducted a pretty large survey of teachers connected to a pension direction for the Federation. We often initiate research which is examining a particular current issue in education. We examine education finance. There is work done on poverty. We also have a substantial number of partnerships with school districts, particularly in the area of teacher inquiry, supporting teacher research. And we do a number of projects have research with universities in partnership for Social Science Humanities Research Council. So I think the overall approach is that we generally do research which the Federation sees as a priority. We often undertake research into issues which are topical, current issues, and we do collaborative research which is a constructive effort, I think, to support education in BC and to contribute to the research community in this province.
Unlike a university research center, your funding is internal from dues of teachers. Is that correct? You don't bid on contracts outside?
That's correct. It's completely paid through membership dues. So members' dues are going into the kind of research that we do as a union research division.
But the results are not limited to access only by members, and in fact other stakeholder groups and entities have shown interest over the years in the work you do.
Yeah, some do, hopefully. I think, yes, a number of our projects would be of interest to school districts, hopefully to other provinces, educators. We have international collaborations through the American Research Association with Australian and UK researchers. So I think there's a wide range of research which is not just directed internally, but is, as I say, I think a contribution both to the general understanding of educational research and to the particular events going on within BC.
And if our viewers want to see the results of your work, how can they access it?
Well, it's mainly published on our website. There is a research report section on the Federation website, and most of our research is openly accessible, including work that Margaret's done on areas such as poverty, which is an additional area for the research, as is inclusion, and we also have built web pages to support inclusionary practices in British Columbia with a Teaching to Diversity web page, which is also part of the Federation website.
Is the information reported in such a way that a non-technical person can understand it?
Absolutely. I think we have fairly rigorous research methods, but hopefully our communication is in relatively plain English and not well understood by any reader. We don't mean to dumb it down, we don't mean to make it inaccessible. The research reports, I think, are quite readable. Hopefully they're accessed by a number of people, both within British Columbia and within the Union and outside the province and outside the Union.
Okay. Margaret, someone in the viewership might ask, why would I want to read research that's done by one of the interested parties in education? What can you say that would lead them to believe the research would be objective and of value across the board to persons interested in BC education?
Okay, well, there's a number of steps that we take. I mean, we're obviously working from an advocacy and research perspective, but for example, we conduct several surveys of teachers about their working and learning conditions, and those are based on random samples, so we don't go out and just select the teachers who will represent our point of view. Once we have the responses to those surveys, we look to see if there's any teacher groups that are not represented in the survey. This is really just standard research practice that would be done in other areas as well. And then make sure that we're transparent about our research methods. We also use a range of methods. It's called triangulation, but qualitative investigation, quantitative methods, as well as secondary data sources. So to look at those findings and see how they validate or conflict with each other, and also external sources of validation. So we locate our findings in the context of the literature. And for example, there's a number of external polls that are done. We look to see whether there's any consistency or differences with what we're finding.
So you would make the case that you are meeting external standards with the manner in which you conduct the research. Is that correct, Charlie?
I would say that, and of course our methods are included in reports, so people can see the sampling processes if it's a survey. If it's a review of literature, for instance, that we've done, they can see if that literature corresponds with what they consider the relevant literature. So I think it's open, it's accessible, it's as open to critique as any other research, and I think our methods are fairly rigorous. We've both done advanced degrees in research methods. It's not as if we're strangers to the concepts. We just happen to work in a union environment, and we think it's objective research in the sense that it pursues information, and we reflect our methods in that research so people can make up their own minds whether it's objective or not.
Okay. We're here particularly to talk about a recent piece of research that your office has done entitled The Worklife of BC Teachers 2009. So to begin the discussion, I think it would help if you explained the structure of this research, how it was conducted, before we get into looking at what it found out.
Okay, well, we started by identifying the teachers that would be eligible for the survey of this teacher population, which was really all active teachers in British Columbia, and determined how many teachers we would need to be able to get statistically valid results, and then drew a random sample from our computerized member database. So that was the first part. And then, of course, was designing the survey. Now, that was based on a structure that was already in place for a 2001 survey on working and learning conditions that Charlie Naylor was involved in, and adapting that with adding some additional questions or refining the questions that we asked. And we added a section that was quite significant this time, which was to really do a qualitative inquiry into what teachers considered the most significant sources of job satisfaction. So to really try to get a sense of what the meaning was in teachers' work, and what gave, I guess, meaning and kept them coming into the classroom and really committed to teaching. So that would be a difference from the 2001 survey.
So you had done a similar survey in the past, 2001 you say, but you modified this one. And now if I were well, how many teachers received the survey?
Around 2,000.
Okay, and your return rate was?
25%, close to it.
How does that contribute to the validity?
We oversampled, actually, for the validity. We needed about 530 results for the size of the member population, and we received 563.
So that meets a technical threshold from your point of view. Okay. Now, if I were a teacher taking the survey, what would it physically look like? What would be? How would I be called upon to respond?
Okay. Well, initially we used two methods just because of the changing technology. So from our member database, teachers who provided email addresses were emailed an invitation to participate in the survey and an online access to an online survey on the bctf server, and for anyone whose either email was returned or did not have an email, we sent out the kind of old way of sending out a mail-out survey and, of course, a reminder 10 days to 14 days later.
So to some degree it was rating scales, is that correct?
Oh,
Yeah, sorry.
go ahead.
Yeah, it's a combination of rating scales where you strongly agree to strongly disagree, and some questions would invite written comment. So there would be, in some cases, extensive written comments by teachers about their views on a particular issue, whether it's job satisfaction or stress or whatever the issue was. So a mixed methods.
Now I want to tunnel into this a little bit because obviously this makes it more cumbersome for you to score. Why were you getting involved in having written statements as opposed to staying with purely objective responses?
Well, I think written statements are objective responses. I think in qualitative research there are strong grounds for believing that a rigorous analysis of qualitative data can give you results and findings which are perfectly objective. So we see that as a part of the objectivity. It also adds to the quantitative data. It complements the quantitative data. Sometimes it adds richness. It gives the vibrancy, the actual feel of a person's work and life in ways that quantitative data fail to do.
But you don't only report the data by quoting from the surveys, you also convert it into quantitative data, is that correct?
No, we actually go through a fairly rigorous coding and thematic generation of themes process. If you probably, just using standard research methodology, we would use a qualitative data analysis software. We would code all the written comments. We would generate themes from those comments, from those codes, I should say, and those themes then would be the articulation of the views of those teachers. So in other words, from say 500 comments, we would be able to identify 5 or 6 key themes that were common among those people.
And was the introduction of these prose narrative different from the 2001 survey? Is that a difference in methodology?
I think the difference is that what we're trying to do here is both hear the voice of teachers, but hear it in their voice. So we want them to express their views as they see their reality, their lives, their work, their passion for teaching. Very difficult to do in a quantitative way. So we can get some sense quantitatively and we can get some sense qualitatively, and it's the mix of the two that I think gives us the basis.
You're introducing this methodology because you feel it is at the cutting edge of social science research, I take it.
Well, I think it's a standard research method, yeah. I mean, I think it's not unusual to have mixed methods, and I think this is a good methodology. It would stand up in a university, I believe, in their world, and I think it's a part of social science research. Cutting edge, yeah, probably. It's good research, I think.
Okay. After the break, we'll get into what you found in the survey. Okay. Thank you.
When I first came to SFU, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. So I started into a specialized French cohort program and got involved in the French Student Union, thinking for sure that I wanted to go into journalism. When I got into my second semester, I suddenly wasn't so sure what I wanted to do anymore. So I started to explore a little bit. Archaeology, communications, history, even kinesiology. And then I decided to go on exchange to France for a year. I was really enjoying my history classes and quickly realized that's what I wanted to study. But all the exploring I had done in other departments still counted towards my degree. I also got involved in campus life. I was an orientation leader for a year, became a community advisor in residence, helped start a choir, I even took a rowing course. Now I'm in my 5th year studying a history major and French and poli-sci minors, and I'm still involved in residence. I'm an area coordinator now and working on sustainability initiatives around campus. After SFU, I have lots of possibilities of what I could do. International development, leadership, teaching. But whatever I do, I know I'll be ready for it.
One way to look at the survey of the work life of teachers is to review the factors from which teachers derive the most satisfaction in the workplace and those which create the most stress for them. So, Charlie, could you begin the discussion by telling us some of the things that were identified as sources of satisfaction in the workplace for teachers?
Well, I think the first thing really that comes out is that teachers get huge satisfaction from the work. It's actually, to call it satisfaction, an understatement. I mean, there was a lot of comments saying how much teachers love their job, and it's a passion for teaching that's very clear among many teachers that responded. So the number one factor in satisfaction was working with students. That was always the factor that got people into teaching. That's what got them there in the morning. That's often what kept them there late at night. Two factors there. One was the moments when kids learn, you know, the aha moment when a kid gets something and they're moving there. And the second part of that is the satisfaction in being part of a child's development, you know, a child growing up and that human development aspect. And the teacher being a positive contributor to that was something that really gave them huge satisfaction. The second area, job satisfaction, was working with peers and parents. When that was working well, that was wonderful. So that collegial, collaborative atmosphere in the school and good relationships with parents were really important to teachers. The next item really was autonomy. Teachers really valued working with autonomy. If they had that autonomy, it gave them satisfaction. That was really not always defined, but the general impression from the data were being able to actually effectively decide what and how you wanted to teach without too much interference, too much direction, too much testing being implemented. So those three things really, the working with students in those two areas, the positive relationships with peers and parents, and autonomy were some of the key factors. But what was more important teachers weren't just saying they were satisfied with teaching, they loved their work, and it was very clear. But there was a duality in that too. They loved their work, but there were a lot of stress factors.
Well, it's encouraging to hear you report that information, because I think most of us would hate to think that the people who were spending school hours with our children didn't love being there and love being with our children. It's not something that's easily measured, but certainly it's something subject to testimony. Did this come through both in the scales and in the narrative?
It came through primarily in the narrative, yeah, but I think there were indications throughout the survey of the intense satisfaction of that work with students and with colleagues. So it came through in a number of ways. And Margaret, you've got other...
Well, I just wanted to add to that, because this was the first time that we really explored qualitatively what the sources of job satisfaction are. Now we have a lot to work with in terms of developing and framing questions for a further survey that really focus more quantitatively. So as this was the first time we included this, it's really it was an opportunity to provide those insights before we started deciding what the
So from the narrative
factors
responses, you now have the raw material to frame rating scale prompts.
Yeah,
right,
to kind of
if we wish to. I think frankly we have sufficient data in one sense of it's very clear where the satisfaction lies for teachers. It's working with students, it's doing what they're there to do, and it's some of the other things outside of that cause the stress. But working with kids and students is the number one
Now,
factor.
where is the curriculum in those areas of satisfaction? Obviously it's embedded because it isn't surfacing literally.
Well, I'm not sure it's that explicit in this survey. The biggest thing people wanted to focus on in terms of satisfaction really were human interactions. Those were and the autonomy. Those were the key factors. It wasn't really about curriculum. The people were not overly interested in addressing curriculum issues. They were interested in talking about community, about relationships, about actual teaching. But as I say, once they got into the stresses, they were things by and large outside of that, although we'll get into some of the areas like lack of support for teaching.
Well, I was pushing on that a little bit because if you're having a satisfying interaction with a parent, it's probably because the parent is delighted either at the personal growth you stimulated in their child or in the cognitive advance that you fostered in their child. So I think the curriculum's in there, but it's embedded rather than being explicit.
I would agree, absolutely. Yeah.
Same with the development. You might be getting satisfaction from seeing social maturation in the child, but you might also be getting it because they've mastered a technique in math or in foreign language grammar that you've been striving to teach the class.
Sure. Yeah.
So I want our audience to understand that what we're talking about is not free from the curriculum or exempt from the curriculum, but the curriculum is probably embedded in it.
It is. Teaching is about relationships fundamentally, and it's those relationships with students as they learn and as they grow that really, there is the passion that our respondents expressed very clearly in the survey.
The next step would be, after we look at this sort of information, to develop some sort of a plan of action to respond. So I think to some degree you offer recommendations as to how we should respond to the information that you've uncovered.
Well, I think it's important to recognise, as we've said, the duality of teaching, the great joy that people have in teaching and the stress that it entails. So some of the things that we think are worth looking at are these issues of the lack of support for students to meet student needs. So if there could be greater discussion about those services that could be provided to improve supports, those will be excellent. In terms of teacher stress, I think there's a lot of literature, and we've accessed that literature in terms of stress in society. There's a great amount of stress in modern society, and nobody's exempt from that. But there's also evidence that certain jobs like teaching, health, social service type jobs generate greater stress within the job itself. And so we are finding a lot of stress in teachers, which is job related, which could be addressed in different ways. And I think there are ways to look at some of these factors, which could be a more comprehensive way to address some issues in education, and some of those, they could involve a range of actions. Some may be discussion among members. For instance, we have a Living with Balance program looking at teacher wellness, but others are more systemic, and they need systemic, a way of addressing them systemically rather than through the individual teacher.
And what recommendations occur to you, Margaret, as you look at the survey?
Well, I think one thing we haven't talked about is we also learned that 1 out of 5 teachers were considering leaving the teaching profession, and they were more likely to be mid-career teachers. When we read through the qualitative comments of why they might be considering that decision, it seemed to me it was really related to all of these stress issues around not having the increased needs of students and diminishing resources, and that in turn was impacting on the classroom, on students' ability to learn, and on teachers' ability to feel effective in the job that they were doing. So I think that it's really, in terms of the recommendations, very important to look at this more closely. It's one finding in the whole study, but it seems to me it's symptomatic of something very significant that we need to look at. Otherwise, we're going to be losing very committed, experienced teachers.
Actually, there are 2 other things that I just put in. One is the issue of newer teachers. There seems to be considerable evidence that newer teachers are stressed by the instability of finding work in BC school districts, where so many get laid off every year or even have difficulty accessing jobs at all. So the issue of people who have been educated and ready to teach but are not getting work, or to getting very irregular work, is not only affecting them, but affects the whole system, because every time they get laid off, the system shuffles around to fill those gaps and meet those needs. So that's one other issue. And the final one that I've seen in the study is the fact that there are some significant gender differences and issues arising, and as teaching becomes a more feminized profession, we have to look at that. So for instance, postgraduate courses, a lot of our women respondents were saying they had difficulty accessing those for both financial and family commitment reasons. So I think those are a couple of areas too that would benefit from some attention, the work life of new teachers and what's going on in terms of gender in BC education. Okay.
Thank you very much for sharing the results of the survey, and I hope our viewers will go to the website and take a look for themselves. We'll be back in a moment. me, the fundamental importance of our teachers is that we as a society put these individuals forward as our emissaries to the rising generation. We put them forward due to their demonstrated knowledge of subject matter and far more. With young children, we are looking for a nurturing attitude in our teachers, an ethos of care that will extend whatever the family provides into a more public sphere. We want instruction and discipline tempered with a human touch that honors the vulnerability of childhood. As the grades progress, we look for teachers to model good character and community values for our youth. We want teachers who show young people what it is to be a responsible, reflective, and balanced member of our society. Those who thrive as teachers, in turn, welcome these roles. They engage their students as holistic beings. Teachers care about the health, equanimity, and motivation of their students, as well as their potential for economic and career achievement. In order to keep the right people in our public school classrooms, we need to reflect on the scope of the teacher's work and to make the school a place where caring, engaged professionals thrive. Think about all those adults who extended kindness and engagement with you when you were young. Let us aspire to do as well for today's children and youth. Thank you for watching Your Education Matters.